welcome officially, Sean. Just finished your book, A Journey Thrice Begun. Been kind of talking back and forth about it, and I really just wanted to dive into some of the intangibles, along with, of course, like specifics of like what it takes to actually go and like write a book. I know for myself and a lot of other booktubers and people who like to like watch booktubers, because we read so much, there's always that like thought in the back of your head that I want to actually write something and release something. But you wrote something that I thought was pretty good, and then like actually put it out there, which in my mind's amazing because that's a huge accomplishment. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Guess we got the two Sean's together finally, and it's I know we were chatting beforehand just a bit, but no, I really appreciate the welcome, and yeah, look, this is all very new for me, so I'm definitely not going to say I'm going to have all the answers, but instead certainly try answer any questions you might have. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen some of my videos, and I generally try to keep a very loose, absurd feel to things, so there's no pressure for this at all to be like any type of serious interview. I've always been more interested in storytelling and just taking something from start to finish.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most authors would say this, but I mean, this is sort of my obsession. So there is literally no other topic I'd rather be talking about than writing. I know my family and friends are sick of talking about it, but sounds like you're ready to hear about it. So yeah, I'm here to talk. Yeah. Um, how do you want to start?
So we can start with before getting into the specifics about your work or anything. Just I guess a quick little book get to know you. But before we even get into that, just to throw you on the spot, what would you say your spirit animal is?
That's a good one. That is my first reaction was wolf. Uh, yeah, just go with my first reaction. Wolf, definitely.
There was no deeper meaning to that question. That's just something I always like to ask people when I meet them, just because the answers vary a lot. So it's fun to kind of get into someone's head.
Yeah. Well, there's no deeper meaning to my answer, but I was thinking, yeah, wolf or dolphin. Um, Depends. I guess like you spend your whole life on land, right? So I guess why would my spirit animal be on land too? So maybe try something different and go dolphin. So I might change my answer actually. I'll go dolphin just because it's something different.
That's a good answer. I always think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, just with like dolphins being the second smartest creatures on the Earth, with humans being third. Just the idea that if you could just swim all day, eat all the fish, and just play for your entire life, like, why would you want to do anything different?
Yeah, that's pretty much the dream, right? Just eating sashimi all day and just chilling in the waves. That sounds pretty good.
I was curious about this, but what would you say the biggest influences that you've had on your writing style? And maybe this is different, but like, what are the type of things you normally read? Like, if you had to say, like, what your go to series that you would recommend to people would be.
I think the answer to both of those would be the same. Only because the more I read of someone, the more it subconsciously influences my writing style. So I guess yeah, I've always had a mix of the classics, the classic authors, more modern authors. So I guess the classics, I just got into at a really young age. So I remember 15, 16. I was already reading Dickens and just loving it. And David Copperfield, that was the first novel that really connected with me at a young age. And then Dickens from there on, I mean, I picked up the Agatha Christie's pretty early, and that was really inspirational. Definitely influenced my writing style. So when I started writing, my mind was always sort of working in mystery format. And I think writing mysteries is quite different to any other form of writing. And yeah, that plan to that payoff, that would all come from Agatha Christie's works. I mean, I felt a bit sorry for my parents, but early on at school, I think they thought I was studying in year 10 and 11, but really I had my door closed and I was just devouring every single Agatha Christie novel. And I don't know if you've read much Agatha Christie. They are in short supply, but they're very good. The ones any that you pick up, you'll be sure to get a good read. But yeah, so the classics would be Agatha Christie. Dickens, Carlos Ruiz Zafón. The Shadow of the Wind was this perfect mix I'd never seen between like cozy, dark mystery. And that was actually sort of the style of my book. Was it begins cozy, it gets a bit grittier and darker as it goes on, and that was definitely influenced by Carlos Ruiz Zafón and The Shadow of the Wind. I guess from more modern authors, the answers are a bit more predictable. Is Sanderson to me is just like, oh, is for me, yeah, that yeah, he was. I honestly can't describe Sanderson. He's just the reason I read fantasy. It's such a heavy rate is because of him. He took me out of those because all those classic authors they weren't really delving into fantasy too much. Sanderson to me was what introduced me to fantasy, and I think not only me, so many others. And that, I mean, I wouldn't have written my book if I hadn't read Sanderson. And I think the whole reason I wrote a book is that hopefully I can one day meet him at a book fair. And that would be the end goal, is to tell him I think he is God, and that'd be a pretty good thing. I mean, that's the end goal here, I think.
It's not writing, but I've done so many Sanderson specific crim posts where I try to reenact them that a couple of them have popped off, and I like to imagine a world that he's seen me play him and got at least a chuckle out of it. Or that, or maybe I'll pass him by in a bookstore one day and he'll see me and then just watch his face kind of like fall because he's like, oh, you're that guy who keeps like playing me. So meeting Sanderson would be great, but that's a good answer. Have you ever read Brent Weeks? He did a few books, but the one specifically I'm thinking about was his Lightbringer series.
Yeah, on that, just for any of my friends watching this interview, I really recommend they check out your most recent video on the trying to release the video about the Way of Kings. Man, that had me laughing. That was a great video. But yeah, back to your question. Yeah, Brent Weeks is an epic author. I thought is I've never thought this before. Like, most fantasy worlds, you're like, oh, that'd be fantastic to live in. I think I read The Painted Man and thought, yeah, no, not for me. I'm happy with Earth. No escapism needed.
I think that's the Warded Man is Peter Brett. Uh, Brent Weeks did The Night Angel, and then The Black Prism, I think is the first
Oh,
book.
I see Black Prison. Yes, no, I had, yeah, I always mixed them up. I actually read Black Prison and The Watered Man back to back, and I always flipped them in my head. No, I've read The Black Prison, and that was one of I think it's my favorite magic system I've ever read. The most intricate, at least. I think you agreed with me because I saw one of your posts on it actually. The using the colors, the color system there, the colors of the rainbow, that was just genius. So yeah, that I'm not going to say influenced me because I don't think my magic system's that great, especially compared to his. But certainly, maybe in future books, if I ever write a better magic system, it'd be awesome to write something like that. That was just fantastic.
He was one of the guys when I think about mixing mystery and fantasy, which you were going for in your book. One of my favorite ones because he just jumps these mystery boxes on you, and then it seems like every other chapter there's like a new thread that he's trying to tie in with the mystery side of it. Just because that's something that I like seeing, like crosses of genres. That he didn't really go as dark as you did, I would say, but just kind of like here's a mystery, here's a mystery, here's a mystery, and like half the fun's just kind of see like how it all just intertwines and comes back together. So I was interested if he would be a influence on you, just because I don't see too many mystery fantasies going around. So it's cool that you're doing something to like add to that weird combination of the two.
No. He was. He's not something that would jump to mind. But no, Brent Weeks. I mean, if you spend so long reading someone's work, I tend to find it comes in, slips in subconsciously. But yeah, I agree he didn't take it as dark as me, but I also don't think it, funny enough, he was ever as light and cozy as me either. Where he sort of stuck in the middle ground where I liked the idea of combining something like Legends and Lattes. You get Travis Baldree with maybe a Joe Abercrombie and seeing whether it was possible to have a book of two halves where the darkness of the second half would almost be dark by comparison. So if you imagine reading Legends and Lattes and actually picking up the First Lord trilogy straight away after reading about Viv and Tandri, I think Glock is going to seem pretty sadistic if he's not sadistic enough as is. So that was sort of an experiment in my book. And yeah, it's funny because as a writer, you don't really know who your authors, who your influences are until people start pointing stuff out in your books. And when someone pointed out that they thought the second half of my book was like grim dark-esque, was I think the word that they used, I realized, that would be Joe Abercrombie. But prior to that, you have no idea. You think it's entirely your own story, and then you actually hear people comparing it to other authors. You're like, oh, maybe I'm not as unique as I thought. All these people have influenced me, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you're inevitably going to be influenced by anything. So I take it as a massive compliment if anyone even describes my work as grimdark-esque, because that just gives me those warm, fuzzy feelings I associate with Abercrombie.
I mean, there's always going to be these crazy innovators that come out and just make something completely new. But just going through like classic fantasy to like 80s fantasy to like what's like being released now, it'd be weird if you didn't see all those influences kind of like pile up and do something. Or I was listening to someone talking about Robert Jordan, which I know you're a fan of, but the idea of like Moraine being like a female Gandalf, like, and today it's like, oh, that's not like too big of like a trope reversal or anything. But at the time, like when that first book got released, it's like no one had like done anything close to that. And it's like taking these things that exist and kind of twist it a little bit, put your own spin on it, becomes your own thing, and you just keep building off of that. Then who knows who's going to be like copying you down the line. It's always like a cool thing just to see how things evolve.
Yeah, they I it might have been Sanderson once said, I'll keep my Sanderson quotes to a minimum. I think he was once saying that there's never really an original idea, where ideas are more often than not a confluence of two different ideas. So you get like, I think it was Danny Bird who wrote this manuscript called The Draven, which was a man it was someone who was half man, half dragon. I thought that was the perfect example. Like, it's the weirdest idea ever, a Draven, half man, half dragon. But that's a perfect example of confluence of ideas. And you don't really think about that, or at least I don't when I'm writing. But yeah, you look back at it and so many things are just a combination of two totally disparate, different things that come together in a weird, wacky way. And I noticed that more as I was writing. And sometimes you just do the opposite of what's been done before. Like I had a lot of people messaging out saying, oh, I can't believe your character, and this isn't the blurb, so it's not a spoiler, rejected the invite to go to the magical university. And that's not really totally different, but it's kind of like a 180 reverse, isn't it? Where I've taken that influence probably from someone like J.K. Rowling or Patrick Rothfuss, the magical school trope, and sort of done the opposite. Because in my mind, it was funny when people were asking, like, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Kindles and Kicks. The other booktuber messaged me saying, I can't believe Everett wouldn't want to go to a magical university. What's wrong with him? And I sort of put the argument back to him. I'm like, well, yeah, there's always people in the world who don't want to go to university or college or school. In a magical world, a magical university, college or school would just be a college, university or school. So maybe there would be people who wouldn't want to go. I know my sister certainly didn't want to go study after school. Like she's done tremendously well writing and done something completely different. So yeah, like whether you're reversing a trope or with your own little spin on it, it's interesting to see which way different authors take it. And I love that about the fantasy community, where every single fantasy author I've read has had a different, unique take on things like just the fundamentals, like magic. And I think it would be very boring to try to do something the same as another fantasy author. And it's kind of the one thing I said about my book is it is a debut novel. I can't promise anything other than it's going to be very different. And I think that's what I love about fantasy, our community, is at least what I've noticed, is every author tries their own stab at these familiar tropes and tries to do something different, which is really cool.
Yeah. That was one of the big draws for me. I was reading it because you had that traditional trope, that call to adventure, like within, I think it was the first 3 or 4 pages, and then just to be like, no, I'm gonna stay here, and then just for the rest of it was like, just from outside context, I knew it was gonna turn grimdark, so it was like trying to figure out where you were actually going to take it. And not do the normal, like, oh, now I'm at the magic school, now like something just pops up, and instead kind of doing that, like winding towards, I won't spoil it, but to where you do end up was a very interesting path that I actually enjoyed a lot. We talked about good influences. Do you have any like guilty pleasure like reading that you do? I personally, every now and again, when I need a break from reading something heavy like Malazan or what's traditionally like good fantasy, I wind up getting into these light novel rabbit holes where it's like protagonist goes into a different world and 99% of it is garbage, but it's entertaining garbage. So I was curious if you had anything like that that you would recommend. Not to say the work's garbage, but something that would be traditional considered good.
I'm never going to say anyone's work's garbage. That's for sure. And I know you're not saying that either. But I I think my guilty pleasure is probably still Harry Potter. Um, I mean, it's one of those things where I know there's so many holes in those books, and everyone's constantly talking to me about all the holes, the logic gaps, things that don't quite make sense. But so for the same reason, my guilty pleasure I'll put on Friends or Seinfeld is you sort of know the characters so well. It's like if you just had like a kind of shitty day and you come home and you don't know what you want to do. I could sit down and read some Harry Potter and just sink in with those familiar characters, watch some Seinfeld, Friends, and I think that's a guilty pleasure because the, I call it guilty just because there is so many fantastic fantasy authors out there. I always do have that little feeling of guilt where, I mean, I haven't read the Greenbone Saga yet by Fonda Lee, and I have been wanting to get to that for so long. So when I am reading Harry Potter, there is that thought at the back of my mind saying, everyone keeps telling you Greenbone Saga is amazing. You really ought to be reading that. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's the point of having a guilty pleasure, right? Is you feel like a little bit guilty about it, but then Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and especially the audiobook, Stephen Fry just kills. Yeah, so no, I'd say Harry Potter, and I'd say it's far from garbage. But yeah, it's fantastic reading, and it's easy to slip into.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an art form where you don't go super technical or make something completely innovative new, but you just do something like really well. It's like I think there's a reason that was like probably the biggest selling fantasy series of all time. J.K. Rowling, issues or not, she wrote something like really great, and it's really cozy, and it's one of those few things that my mom and family like loves Harry Potter. So every time I visit, there's a 60% chance like one of the movies is going to be on because that's everyone's like comfort food.
Yeah, they're great. They're great for a rainy day.
So, outside of books, do you have any like favorite movies, series, any really other form of media that you think has like influenced you or that you particularly enjoy?
So, funnily enough, I'd almost say that I'm influenced as much by movies as I am by books. Uh, so my influences, you know, thinking about what movies off the top of my head that have really changed my world of writing. Like, I don't think I would have been maybe not writing fantasy. I don't know maybe I've been sticking with mystery if I hadn't actually watched The Lord of the Rings. So I think I was 12 when they came out. I wasn't consuming those tombs at that point. So I watched them before reading them. Very much enjoyed the books. I just felt like that was entirely different experience. But the movies really, I watched them once a year. I used to try to read the books once a year, but I'm not doing that anymore. Just don't have the time. But yeah, I'll watch them once a year. I think the first Matrix, I just like to pretend the second and third. God, there's even a fourth. I pretend those did not happen. So the first Matrix for me is just like what a story should be. Like the convergence at the end of the themes, the character arc, the love story out, it all happens in like 2, 3 minutes is just perfect script writing for me. So I really thoroughly enjoy it. It's a weird hobby of mine, just getting a movie script and just pouring through it like a book. And I've done that for all my favorite movies. Like 12 Angry Men to me is just what character work really should. Have you watched 12 Angry Men by any chance?
I think I have.
Yeah, the jury in a room, they're sort of locked together, and they're trying to come to a verdict as to guilty or not guilty for some young kid who'd allegedly committed murder. It's like it's from the 50s. It's black and white. Look, I'm asking you to sort of step out on a ledge for me here, but you really should. I know it's old, and I know probably not a lot of your friends have watched it, but it's just essential viewing for character work. Like they could do this, make this movie within one room, and that. I'm a very character-led writer, and that would certainly have influenced me. That movie there, and yeah, I mean, there's a million more movies I could go on about, but I won't. I just want you to watch 12 Angry Men, please. You would absolutely love it.
I'll check it out. I thought I'd seen it, but when you said black and white, I was like, no, I haven't seen that. Okay, so we covered biggest influences, guilty pleasures, favorite movie influences or the type of film influences. But what do you like to do outside of writing?
Uh, I I especially when summer comes around, I think yeah, surfing's huge here. So living on the northern beaches of Sydney, I've been fortunate enough to grow up around the corner from the beach and always stayed very close to the beach. And I mean, yeah, first thing I'm doing to celebrate publication today is obviously hanging out with you, which is great to finally put a face to a name. But then afterwards, I'll be going for a surf, and if you don't see me again, it's because right now there's these really big jellyfish sort of stingers. They're called blue bottles, and like they are agony. And I dodged like 4 or 5 of them yesterday by like a centimeter. And sort of if they sting you, like my, your emu experiences you were talking about as a kid. I know for the viewers, there's no context, but obviously you, Sean, are very traumatized by emus, understandably. That's sort of me with these jellyfish stingers that come out in Australia every now and again. And if they sting you, it's just agony. Like you don't know where your poison glands are until you've been stung by one of these. So, like, unfortunately, there's two in between your groin and two underneath your armpits. And when you get stung, it's just both agony there as your poison glands soak it all up. So, yeah, I guess that's what I like to do in my spare time and don't like to do. I don't like to be stung by those things. So it's a bit of pleasure and pain surfing. And
Like surfing, don't like jellyfish things.
yeah. I mean, you know what? Nothing's ever perfect, and that's surfing. I mean, that's the worst thing about surfing is there's always bad days, and you don't always get good surf. And then yesterday it was really good surf, but these jellyfish they were trying to kill me the whole time. So it's yeah. But I mean, I do spend so much time writing. As boring as that sounds, where that's my main obsession. I get up every morning. It's the first thing I do each day. I write all day. I don't want to be the next Rothfuss and take forever to get book 2 out. So I'm already 20% into book 2 just because my friends who have read it already would just kill me if they have to wait too long to get the next book. So yeah, I'm a pretty boring dude if I'm honest. Yeah, I'm just a writer through and through.
Nice. That's probably good. I know for me personally, writing, I love doing it, but then I love making videos, and I probably have too many hobbies in general. So then it's like it's very easy to get completely sidetracked on trying to make like 6 different creative things and then be like, oh, wait, I started out trying to like do this to become a writer. And so being singularly focused is probably a lot better for your readers because you can, if you enjoy doing that, it's like Sanderson. It's like his main thing's writing. So it's like during COVID, everyone thought he was going to retire when we made that like secret announcement or that I have a confession video.
Oh, that was scary.
And he was like, I wrote like 6, 7 books in secret. and top of the normal like release schedule that was already very insane to begin with. So I think being obsessed, especially if that's like what you're passionate about writing specifically, is probably a good thing.
Yeah, you should. If I'd had a heart rate monitor on, and I'm sure you would have been the same for that announcement, because it started off where I think everyone thought he was going to retire, like you said. But then he said he did something bad. I was like, oh, he's killed someone. And then he was like, oh, I've actually written all these. I thought it was four. I can't really remember. But yeah, there's three or four new books, 5 or 6 new books. And that guy's prodigious. I mean, that guy, yeah, I mean, that's just genius. I'll happily say that I'll never release 2 books, 3 books, 4 books in one year. It's just I just don't have that in me. Um, but yeah, that guy is and they're all good books as well. That was the thing. Like I would have totally cut him some slack if they weren't the best reads ever. But I mean, Tress of the Emerald Sea was I think that year my one of my favorite reads of that year. Like definitely my top five. I can't go into the twist in that book now, but that twist between Huck and I won't say the other name. I can say the other name. It's not really give away Charlie. That twist just blew my mind. It was
Yeah, he's I think he said it on one of his podcasts, which insane he also has like a pretty regular podcast schedule on top of everything else he's doing. But he consistently feels like he writes sevens, but he can just churn those out. So by the time when you finish, if you have like 50 books out and they're all above average, maybe not like mind blowing, amazing, changing the game, but you're just putting out so many good ones, like year after year after year. It's just insane, like to keep that level and never really dip.
so sort of like he's like the fantasy James Patterson. Now I think about it.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, he's one of the few people that I consider to treat writing like a small business. So everything he does seems geared towards like letting him crank out stuff because that's what he likes doing is like releasing the books. So the idea of like building a team around you as like an artist that lets you release that many books and do so many things rather than just being like the tortured soul who sits in the attic and then just like writes really good things but maybe not so often or waits for inspiration. Sanderson's just found a system, something, some kind of secret magic that just lets him book after book after book and be consistent, which is I think probably the hardest thing in like any type of art form or anything is to be consistently like good.
Hopefully one day we get to meet him and tell him this personally. Hopefully we meet him together and we can just praise the hell out of him. But yeah, it's I was reading the other day he has like an HR director. So I mean that's when you've got a proper company when you actually need an HR manager. Um, so good for him. If it means he can release more books that you and I can read, whatever you need to do, you need to do.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start trying to get into your specific writing stuff. So, writing a book, big commitment. You've said you've had other writers in your family, which is super cool. I'm sure they were like a huge influence. But what made you actually like take the leap to decide that you were gonna like write and release a book?
So it was a funny thing that happened. I think so many people in my family are writers and authors. It just seemed a bit banal to go down the same route, and I think that's natural for any kid. Is you always want to do something different. Um, so I ended up being getting a law degree and becoming a criminal defense lawyer. So to explain that, you commit a crime, you might be innocent of that crime, you might be guilty. If you're innocent, then I'd try to defend you in court, or if you were guilty, I'd try get you a lenient sentence or at least a just sentence that was fair on both sides. And I noticed a lot of my cases, right? So 95% of cases in the legal system just go straight to sentencing because the person pleads guilty, they know they're guilty, and you're telling a story to the judge because the judge needs to know the person before he sentences them. So it was like this ultimate character work, right? Where some days, if I was the legal aid officer of that court, I'd be the only person representing people without lawyers. So I'd have to run 30 cases in a day. And it was just really quick, under the gun, under pressure storytelling, where I would meet someone in the cells below the court. if it was like outback Australia, you could barely see them. It was like dungeon-esque cells underneath these old courthouses in the middle of absolute nowhere. And he'd be like, you'd have 5 minutes. He'd be like, tell me about you. I want to hear your story. I want to get to know you. Give me 5 minutes. And then you'd take that, you'd run upstairs and you'd tell that person the story to the magistrate or the judge presiding. And it was then that I realized that I got a lot of enjoyment in trying to make sure that the court understood the person they were sentencing. I think that was really important for a fair sentence. Like sometimes someone's guilty, but there's an extraneous circumstances, and that their court needs to be made aware of. And I think it was pretty much at one point telling 30 small stories a day where I started having ideas that maybe I could tell stories for a living, and maybe it would be a lot easier if I didn't have 5 minutes per person. So I guess when I had 3 years to create Everett as a character, a lot of that under the pressure storytelling in courthouses really paid off. And I can't really point to when I decided to put pen to paper. It was it might have just been a bit of boredom one morning where I was like, oh, I could start jotting down some ideas for a story, and then I guess one idea leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. But all those ideas, and I'm pretty sure it would have been because of my background in criminal defense law, they all started with character. So it was interesting that I never, and I know most authors, from what I can tell, start with the plot, the story, what is going to happen, and the characters sort of fit into that. And that, to me, that actually makes more sense. So for anyone watching this, I'd highly recommend that way. For me, it was a bit different, where it started with the characters that sort of just fell into my head. I put them into a world, and I guess that was why so much of my book has quite a different feel, is because the characters just ended up being quite different. I mean, the fact that Everett didn't want to go to a magical university. He wanted to basically propose to Isolde Fairweather. He loves her. He wants to be with her. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Like, I actually started the book and I assumed he'd want to go to a magical university. And this probably sounds a bit insane because characters, they're not real, right? But in my head, they sort of are. And he made the decision that he didn't want to go. And I was like, okay, well, let's see where this leads. And then I sort of followed him on his journey, and it was like me experiencing the story at the same time as the writer. And yeah, I guess that's where it all developed from. So yeah, loosely it'd be criminal law, and I always had the idea, funnily enough, from where the writing came from, to have the piano at the center of it all. And that, I'm just a big piano player. It's actually, I should have mentioned that alongside surfing, is been playing the piano for a very, very long time. And that's, the story always had that at its core, where if it ever started going down paths I didn't want it to go, or characters started making decisions I didn't expect, I always just kept the piano at the very core of it. Don't ask me why, but yeah, that's sort of how it all started, with a piano and a set of very strange and different fantasy characters that led me on some weird, wacky paths. And hopefully that means, because it wasn't a plot I created, it was characters, that if you read it, and I've had this feedback from some people, that it was very hard to anticipate what happened next, and it read like something very different. And I hope that's because it is character-led.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you mentioned Joe Abercrombie being such a big influence, and for him, character-driven is the name of the game. I mean, I've heard the hot take that the first law, like the first book of the first law trilogy, doesn't have a plot. It's just character introductions. And I mean, I feel like he's the master character writer, but for me, like rereading that after hearing that, I was like, oh yeah, we're just meeting people and they're really interesting. And then even though there's not like a plot, you're just so engaged. And for your book too, especially like the starting cast, like everyone's like very distinct, which for a lot of debut writers I've seen, or indie authors, and even guys like I absolutely love, I always forget his name, but the guy who did Starter Villain and Old Man's War, I'll post it on the screen, his name, but I'm a huge fan of his, But his first books were like just so focused on like a singular character, and that character had such a strong personality. Everyone else just seemed like versions of that character saying like the same type of dialogue he would. And like I love him as a writer, but you were able to actually go in and like make a pretty distinct cast of characters like from the get-go, which pretty intertwined in some pretty entertaining ways.
Yeah. Well, I actually got really lucky with that. I feel like all those characters sort of fell into my head very fully formed. So that was a real stroke of luck, which might make it harder in the future to write future trilogies. I don't really know, but I just felt like I got very, very lucky with those characters. That it was a story. Like I hope other people like them, but at the end of the day, they created a very fun writing experience for me, where I didn't have to put too much work into the characters and where they came from. I'm sure is an amalgamation of people in my life. Or you really don't know, but yeah, I totally agree. And with respect to First Law, I loved that first book, but I've had friends accuse it of being just one giant prologue. So you're so right. But yeah, I can, if you give me a great character to cling on to, and I mean, Joe Abercrombie gave us like six, didn't he? Um, I'll go anywhere with them.
Okay, so that kind of, I was going to ask you if you were like more of a pantser or a plotter, referring to like, did you outline everything beforehand, or if you did you just have some characters and or experience the story as you're like writing it as the same way like a reader would? But it sounds like you're very much on the pantser side of the house.
Yeah. So I have the characters make the decisions, but the world building happened at the same time. So like I introduced them into a world that was fully constructed. So I I guess because I've done it that way is I'm sort of right in the middle. So it isn't I've introduced the characters and just let them go wherever they want. Their journey was in a lot of respects curtailed by the limitations of the world that sort of surrounded them. So the world building allowed me to write a very clear outline for all three books. So I mean, I know the last line of book three is one of the first things I wrote because I wanted to have that to steer towards. So I've always known the last line of book three, but in terms of the directions that characters want to go, they are free in how to get there. Um, but the world is sort of like, I can almost imagine if you've ever been like 10-pin bowling, is those bars you can raise along the side so that the ball can sort of whiz back and forth and hit it. It doesn't ever go in the gutter. I think it's mainly for kids. But I always imagine the world building to be a little like that. And then you let the characters walk through and that they will bounce off the walls occasionally. But the point of having those walls is that you can write with longevity in mind. So you can actually write one book, but it's going to be a trilogy. Whereas right now, if I hadn't had that, it would be very hard for me to say, oh, the Return Journey trilogy. It'd just be TBC. Like I could pull a I could pull a Jordan and go for 14 books. You never know, but um, yeah, it's sort of a mix between Architect and Panther.
I've always thought that was an interesting way to go about it. Erickson did something kind of like that, where he built this crazy, insane world of Malazan originally as like a homebrew D&D game. Basically, they role played through the story of Malazan, and of course, he went and tied it all up. But the idea of just like, here's where we're gonna have everything, kind of like you're the dungeon master, and then you want to get things here, but then you have to herd cats just to try to get them there. Winds up like a little more winding, harder to guess, like you were saying. So that's a pretty fun way to go about it. Would you recommend that to other people, just building everything out first and then like throwing them in there, or has that like been harder or introduced headaches for you?
I think to answer your question, yeah, definitely it introduces some headaches, especially when, for instance, I created a magic school, right? And went to significant effort to create what this magic school would be, and then my character didn't want to go. So it was those are the headaches you're gonna have to put up with. Where if you're gonna start and create the world first and drop the characters in, you sort of got to come to terms with the fact that so much of your world is going to be wasted. It's never going to be experienced. So I actually noticed when I finished the book, it kind of felt like the readers really would see the top 5%, and then there's like 95% under that. Yeah, it's great that it's there, but it's really not needed per se. Like the characters don't interact with it. I think Everett's mum has a story that I I don't think I'll ever tell one day, but I've written her entire story about what happened to her in the past, and I think the mother gets mentioned maybe twice at most in the entire book, just by name. I can't even remember if her name's actually mentioned. I know it's referred to as Everett's mother, but I mean, she has an incredible story, but it just never came out. And I guess whether I'd recommend that to someone is, do you have enough time, or are you willing to waste time to write things and tell things and that are never going to be shown? I guess it's all about, do you want to have stuff behind the curtain that's not revealed? And I guess that's a choice that's unique to everyone. For me, it was yes. I liked knowing the history of Riverball, where it came from as a sport, but I can understand it's not for everyone.
Since you spent so much time like building up this world, you were saying, reader only really experiences like 5, maybe 10% of what you actually built. Once you finish this trilogy, do you think you're going to go back into the same world and write more stories with that, or do you think you would want to like break away, do something completely new? And if you were going to do that, what do you think you would like try to write, or is you're just so focused on what you're doing now that it hasn't even come up?
It hasn't even come up, but I'll give it some thought. Yeah, I don't think I'd write in the same world. I think, I mean, these set of characters in this world, I think they fell into my head, and the world fit around them. And I couldn't imagine another set of characters in this world. I know Joe Abercrombie, after First Law, had all those standalones, and you've got stuff like The Heroes, which is a brilliant book, with completely different characters, and then you sort of have the original cast mentioned. I think it would break my heart in a weird way to have the original cast mentioned like that, but not be able to write about them. In the same way, I guess it'd be strange to have another set of students go through school at Hogwarts. Yeah, I mean, the idea would offer so many writing opportunities, but would you really want to go through it again without like Harry, Ron, and Hermione? And I know my characters will never sort of stand up to those characters, but in my head, like I'm like those characters fell into my head just the way they are, and I just couldn't imagine experiencing that particular world um, without them. But I mean, I'm more like, I think that being an obsessive is, there's always a million different story ideas like flying at you. I've got a folder that is just like 100 pages on my phone of just ideas that have just come to me, and they come from all walks of life. So I think it'd be an entirely different world. And I've always liked the idea of experimenting with a portal world. Like you have, you got Narnia. That's the typical example of a portal world. And I guess being so close to the ocean, I thought the idea of a portal world to some extent, um, maybe being in the ocean, but not Avatar Way of Water sort of style, like something entirely different. That, yeah, I don't know. I guarantee none of this stuff I'm about to talk about would ever feature in books in the future. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question though.
That's one of my problems is whenever I start writing something, I'll have like ideas come that don't fit in the story I'm writing. But then it's like a kind of such a tempting idea that I think I wind up building up that idea instead of working on what I should be working on. So then when I finish it, part of the reason why I like to just like kind of write something, put it away, come back to it later to edit, a lot of times I'll just get then so immersed in making something new that it's like, oh wait, I was supposed to edit these like now 4 or 5 things, but instead I wrote another thing. And it's just, for me, it's that constant thing of just like, oh, that's a cool idea, let's chase it. So maybe it's just like my inner ADD with that type of thing. But since you had it all planned out, I didn't know if you were having that type of temptation too, or if it's just like kind of focused on just getting this one out.
No, yeah, no, I always maybe a bit more tunnel vision, whereas I, yeah, so I was very tunnel visioned on getting this book done. So when those ideas came to me, yeah, I'd sort of like to just sort of compartmentalize them. I'd put them in this folder, so didn't feel like I'd lost them. They're there for later. I'm sure when I go write my next book after this trilogy, um, the ideas in there somewhere, and in those 100 or so pages, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, I guess it's interesting to hear you say that. It sounds like inspiration strikes you at any different moment, at any different time, and in any different direction. Um, but yeah, it's maybe my neurodivergence makes me a bit more tunnel visioned.
That's good if people pick up your book and are a fan of it. This means you're less likely to get distracted. I've always quantity until you get to quality type of mindset, but I also read a lot of indie authors or people who start out with like web novels. We talked separately about like The Wandering Inn, like Pirate Ava, and I really enjoyed the first book. Like I went back and read it recently, and while it's nowhere near the level of quality that where she's at now, at least what's been released on like Amazon, which is I think book 14 or 15, it's just amazing the improvement. But just keep cranking it out, and then it eventually becomes this amazing, crazy thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's going well. Yeah, litrpg. I was speaking to a friend Brian from Beltube. Really good guy, and what I really like about his channel is he's very much on the forefront of lit RPG, and I hope people don't forget that in the future. That he was really one of the early adopters. If lit RPG ends up being as big as Romantasy, or if not bigger, it seems like there's that bit of a trend where this could be the next Romantasy. I think Brian was straight on that with Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I think it's a whole new genre where I don't know if you could compare the Wheel of Time to the Wandering Inn. I know that the length's so different, but lit RPG is just such a different. It's just such a different area to write in, where the pages flow endlessly. I mean, Dungeon Crawler Carl, I can listen to that for 2 hours and it feels like 2 minutes. That I think it's Jeff Hayes' narration is just fantastic, but I'd hate for people to be put off the Wandering Inn, and I'm certainly going to delve in just because of its size. It's because it's a different type of story.
It's great. It's a commitment. It's 3 times the length of the Wheel of Time when the statistic was made 2 years ago, and she's written so much more since then. Yeah, she plays with a lot of different genres too. So it's so big now. The world's so fleshed out that for certain like arcs or sections, she'll be like, I want to write like a mystery, or I'm going to turn this into something darker. She does cozy very well too, which you might enjoy. But probably other than or this year, I found Dungeon Crawler Carl and The Wandering Inn, and while they are very different books, they're probably like both of them skyrocketing into like my top 5 just for like what they've done, even though they're so different and arcs. So having those two just sneak up out of nowhere is just insane.
Do you remember? You were the one that got me starting to read DCC. Yeah, I'm not sure if you remember that, but that was me. I remember emailing you and be like, "Thank you. This is this is incredible."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how you can swing from complete opposite ends of the emotional spectrum so quickly with his writing. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just re-listened to it with the upcoming book coming out, and then I was just like blown away. I was thinking about the absurdity of it, and not to do any two spoilers, but it was like a cat was on stage singing. There was a dinosaur that was moonwalking. Carl was talking to like a half tree lady, and even with all that absurdity happening, they managed to like hit me with such an emotional punch. I was like driving, listening to it, and all of a sudden I'm like tearing up and getting emotional just because like, despite all that crazy absurdity, they're still like just packing these like crazy punches. I guess before we go is, are there any underrated books that you have that you've read that you don't see a lot of people talking about that you'd want to like recommend out there for people? Could be another indie author, could be just kind of whatever, something that you think that doesn't get enough like talk right now.
Yeah. Oh, mate, I had a blast. The Shadow of the Wind. Is maybe I'm not as good at recommending books as you are. I think you're quite the salesman when it comes to books, which I really appreciate. Like when you get into things like DCC, when you speak about it, I sprint out the front door to go buy it. Um, and maybe I don't have that sort of gravitas because I'm constantly recommending The Shadow of the Wind to friends and family, and I've bought it for a couple of mates now. I know none of them have read it, but really, if I'd certainly recommend giving that a read. Is it really is? I think it was the best selling Spanish book for like 5 years running or something. He's sadly passed away now. But Zafón is just a literary genius in my mind. He's just one of those classic authors who isn't obviously talked about as much as like a Dickens or Agatha Christie, but whose work, I mean, even nowadays, I mean, it's a translation. It's obviously written in his native tongue, but the prose is so easy to slip into. There's this cozy mystery. The protagonist is super likable. I'm just trying to think of all the ways to sell this book. I'm probably better at selling this book than my own book, but it's just a fantastic read from start to finish. And I'd be so happy if people didn't pick up my book but read The Shadow of the Wind post this interview. That'd be a real win for me.
Awesome. I'll link it down in the channel description for anyone interested. You have any like social media stuff you want to plug, or any where people can find your book or anything?
Yeah. So it's A Journey Thrice Begun by Sean Bobby Kerr. If you search that into Amazon or Goodreads, you'll have the links. I'm sure I'll pop you over the link after this, and you can put it down the bottom. But yeah, if you want to check out my socials, it's just Sean Bobby Kerr, or one word, on Instagram. And obviously X, or Twitter rather, if you'd like to follow me there too. Or don't follow me because I'm useless with social media. So if you don't want to follow me, you'd actually be probably doing yourself a favor.
Yeah, I have the same problem, but it's one of those necessary marketing evils, I'm afraid. Or you could just write an insane amount and have people pick up your stuff. Solid strategy too.
Definitely. Or you can be Sanderson and do all of the above perfectly. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, just hire your own team, handle it, HR director, IT guy to manage all your like lore that has built up, just ready to go.
Sounds like a headache. Not for me. Yeah. No, thank you very much for your time.
All right, we'll appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by, and like we just talked about, everything will be listed down below. Thanks again, Sean, and I'll talk to you later.